Hello everyone, my name is Jake Kurth. I'm with Leeds Forensic Systems. Thanks for tuning in to another one of our Leeds Helpful Tips live streams. Every week we put together a new training topic or new presentation topic that covers the breadth of our forensic microscopes. This week's particular topic is all about some options that we have for polarized light and reflected light Brightfield for our Trace Z comparison microscope as well as our LCT comparison microscope. Our video today is going to be kind of a short one. We're going to kind of just do top level, what it is, how it works, and how it's relevant to labs that perhaps already have our comparison microscopes. But before we begin, a couple quick comments. This is a live stream, and it's coming to you live from our offices in Minneapolis. So bear with me if we have any signal hiccups or anything like that. Additionally, we do, if you have a Google account or a YouTube account and you're comfortable logging in, you can go ahead and log in and ask any questions that you'd like in the chat. And what I'll do is I'll look over every once in a while, like I'm doing right now, just to see if we have any questions, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get into it. So the microscope you see next to me is the Trace Z comparison microscope. It's one of our two kind of models of trace comparison microscopes that we sell, both the Trace Z as well as the LCT comparison microscope. And today, while I have the system here, really everything I'm talking about can be used on both of our comparison scopes. So one of the big topics that comes up with trace comparison work is having multiple different types of techniques to look at two samples. Maybe one is known, one is unknown. And so what we've done in the past is when customers of ours have expressed interest in reflected light Brightfield and reflected light pole, at the same time as being interested in fluorescence, which is also technically a reflected light technique. In the past, what we would need to do is sell you two separate light sources. One light source would be for your reflected light, your fluorescence light, which is usually a mercury light source, or a mercury burner, or a metal halide, but ultimately it's a specialized light source for fluorescence excitation. And then we'd also sell you a halogen light source. And so what we had to do in the past, I mean, even as of, I would argue maybe 5 or 6, maybe 10 years ago, what we would do is we'd sell you on your comparison scope, attached to your reflected light illuminator. It was kind of like a Y, basically. And where we would attach, we'd attach the mercury light source to one joint, we'd attach your halogen light source to the other joint. You're having to buy twice as many light sources, but they're each used for reflected light in the halogen or fluorescence for the mercury. What's changed and what's really exciting, and we're going to have another video that goes all into it specifically, is LEDs. You've probably been noticing it. My ring light is LED based. A lot of indoor lighting is LED based. LEDs have come down in price and increased in performance pretty dramatically in the last decade and easily within the last 5 years. And that's also come into microscopy. Again, we have a whole other video we're going to go through where we talk about, how we've been using LEDs for our trace comparison scope. But ultimately, why it's important for this video is instead of having to sell a lab either looking to upgrade a microscope, a comparison scope of ours that they already have with fluorescence, trying to upgrade it to fluorescence and reflected light Brightfield, instead of having to sell two light sources, what we've been able to do is sell a single LED light source. So more and more frequently on our newer comparison scopes, we are selling an Excite 120 LED light source. And essentially, it's LED powered, it's liquid cooled, and it's really, really bright. And it has enough intensity that it works marvelous for fluorescence excitation. But what's really cool about it is it also has really good color rendering, and it's a white light. It's a broad spectrum LED. And why that's important is instead of having to have that mercury light and the halogen light, it's the single light. What we're able to do is use a single light source for both reflected light technique as well as reflected light Brightfield, reflected light pole, as well as fluorescence. And it's a single light source that does everything. So Leeds, what we do, there's some other things that we have to pay attention to it. And why is this important? And the reason this is important is because what we can do is either we can come to your existing comparison scope. Maybe you have an older fluorescence trace comparison microscope, or maybe you're interested in buying a completely new comparison microscope. It's a lot easier upgrade path. So what we've done is we've developed a filter cube. So this is a filter cube. This is actually a custom reflected light, polarized light filter cube. It simply gets inserted into the fluorescence illuminator, would either replace a filter cube that you already have, or in most cases just add to the filter set that you already have. And then this one's actually a reflected light Brightfield cube that would go in. So you might be asking, okay, that's great. I've got fluorescence, I've got transmitted light pole, I've got reflected light, or transmitted light pole, transmitted light Brightfield. Why would I want reflected light pole and Brightfield? Or maybe you've thought about it in the past, but thought that it's too expensive or it adds too much complication to your microscope. The big advantage that reflected light Brightfield and reflected light polarized light have when you add it onto a microscope that already has a reflected light illumination system is it gives you the ability to do comparison work on dark samples or samples that you can't just transmit light through. So imagine if you're working with automotive paints that are kind of thick, or metallic paints, or things that just transmission of light isn't going to move through. The reflected light techniques allow you to do comparisons on those type of samples. And you can even do pole work there. So on our polarizing, on the reflected light pole that we would sell, that we equip labs with, it has field stops, it has aperture stops. You can do Kohler technique on these dark, or I'm using the wrong word, they're not dark samples, but they don't transmit light samples, these opaque samples. And it just allows you a lot more out of your microscope and capability. There's some other things that we do with our reflected light Brightfield and reflected light pole. We add it to a system. One of the big ones is polarizers these days are essentially stretched plastic that then light moves through and goes into phase with. So one of the things that we have to be careful with when we're building a comparison scope that's using this single light source is because of all that energy coming out of the light source, we need to do some filtering to block the UV component and the infrared component so it doesn't just burn out our polarizers. So there's other things that we do there too. But the end result is that it's a fairly easy upgrade. It allows you a whole different technique, a whole different way to look at your samples, and it's fairly easy to implement. I had planned today to have some example pictures and some example slides so I could show you the technique, show you kind of what we're working with. And unfortunately, I just don't have those today. I'm thinking probably what we should do, if people are interested, is perhaps just have a technique day where we would have a technique live stream where I'd show different types of techniques that we have on our comparison scopes, walk through the optical equipment, that type of thing. I might ask some of our customers if they're interested and perhaps do a live stream on that. But today's live stream, basically, reflected light Brightfield, reflected light pole, is we have easily implemented systems. If you're looking at new comparison scope, it's not as expensive as you might think to add a whole another layer of technique to your microscope. And if you already have one of our microscopes, most of the time you can field retrofit and add this technique to what you already have. And so then you just have more techniques that you can compare your samples at. Again, like I said, this was a short video today. We might revisit this topic with some samples, with the setup, along with some other types of samples that we've seen from our customers, and have a different live stream on that. But if there's no further questions, or there's no questions, thanks for watching. I'm Jake with Leeds. Again, every week we have a new live stream topic talking about our products. If you have anything you would like us to cover, or would like us to go more in depth on, like those samples that I'm thinking we're going to do, please feel free to email me at jkurth@leedsmicro.com, and we'll get it added to the schedule.